Good morning, everyone. Boker tov l'kulam, and welcome in to this session of exploring the Siddur, exploring the prayer book. I am your humble host, Rabbi Ross Levy, the assistant rabbi here at Congregation Kol Ami in West Hollywood, California. I hope wherever or whenever you might be watching this, that this video finds you well. And today, just as a quick overview, we have a lot to get through today. Quick overview of this series is a way of exploring the prayer book and viewing the prayer book as a text. In the same way that we would read the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, the Talmud, the Mishnah, other compilations of Jewish texts, the prayer book is very much one of those. Even though we often use it only during services and rarely sort of dig in deep in that same deep textual study that we often associate with Torah study, it is a text, and it is a text with many different layers that have developed over the course of centuries, and that's something we're going to look into today. So please take a chance to grab the song/text sheet, which will be guiding our session today. If you can find it at the Congregation Kol Ami website, kol-ami.org. It should be posting in Facebook as well, and go ahead and pull that up so you can follow along with us. And over the course of the past few sessions, we've gone through these different rubrics of the typical morning service. And we're doing the morning service as a quick reminder, because it's generally the most full service that we see. And so on page 1 of our sheet, and you can also find the link on the PDF to a digital copy of Mishkan Tefillah, our Reform prayer book, and I include page numbers throughout all the texts that we're going to be looking at. So over the course of the past few sessions, we've been going through the morning blessings, the way we begin our day with gratitude and building our identity. We continued with Pesukei de Zimra, songs of verses of praise, verses of song, a way of singing and building up our spiritual energy as we prepare for the actual prayer. We moved into, a couple weeks ago, the Shema and Its Blessings, another distinct rubric, which is very much grounded on the one hand in this notion of creation, revelation, redemption, that narrative which guides it. It's also, as you'll see in this handy-dandy graphic from Professor Larry Hoffman, seen as the creed, sort of a statement of belief, and also a recognition of sort of this unique relationship we have with revelation, with the Torah, with text, as well as with the divine. And today we are continuing with the Amidah. The Amidah, in many ways, is really the central prayer text of any service, for the most part. You'll notice that the Torah service is seen as sort of the pinnacle of the service, and on Shabbat, or in traditional communities on Mondays and Thursdays, it very much is, because it is building up to sort of reenacting the moment at Mount Sinai when the Israelites received the Torah from God. But for most services, the Amidah is very much the central part. And if you'll remember from our previous sessions, if you haven't seen them, I would encourage you to go check them out. They're on YouTube. They're also here on Facebook or on the Kol Ami website. You'll remember that I mentioned the difference between prayers and blessings. Generally, blessings is a way of saying thank you, and prayers are a way of saying please. And so when we get to the Amidah, we really get to what most people think of as prayer, asking God, asking the universe, whatever energy, however you conceive of sort of the divine, for certain things. And as part of the Amidah, particularly in the weekday, there are certain things that we're asking for. We ask for healing, we ask for peace, we ask for knowledge. We'll be getting into it in a little bit, but this is really the moment when we begin our supplications. And supplications is sort of a fancy word for asking for things, for if you have a theology where, it's not ask and God grants things to you, it's also a way of vocalizing these yearnings that we have, as a way of expressing things that we hope to happen in the future. And also think about the different things that we may be praying for. And something we'll be getting into in a couple minutes is the difference between the written prayer, the prayers as they appear in the Siddur, and the prayers that come from within us. And so let's go ahead and dive into the Amidah, and I've titled this session, Daring to Ask Praise Before Petition. So we begin on page 2 of your handout with this passage from the Mishnah, compiled around 200 CE, but containing teachings from much earlier, and is considered sort of the Or text, the original text of, or the first written form of oral Torah. The belief for us as Jews is that when the Torah was given at Sinai, there was the written Torah in the form of the Torah we talk about, the 5 books of Moses, as well as the oral Torah, which eventually was written down after the destruction of the temple in 200 CE, and then expanded and supplemented by the Talmud and Midrash. So here we have a few different teachings from very well-known sages. We have Rabban Gamliel says, every day a person must pray the 18, and the 18 he's referring to here are the 18 blessings of the Amidah. So you'll notice if you crack open a prayer book during a weekday service, generally the Amidah includes actually not 18, but 19 blessings. We'll get into that in a second. But it's also referred to not just as the Amidah. Amidah means standing. Traditionally, this is one of the few times during the service when we stand. But also, it is referred to as the Shemona Esrei, which means the 18. And so here in this early text, we see Rabban Gamliel laying out this notion that every day a person must pray these 18 blessings. Rabbi Yehoshua says, you don't have to say all of them, or at least all of them as they conceived of them, but you can say an abbreviated form. Maybe you are busy. Maybe you don't have time to really sit and bring all of your intention, but you can say a shortened version of the 18 blessings. And Rabbi Akiva sort of splits the difference. He says if prayer is fluent in their mouths, meaning if people are accustomed to saying the whole 18 blessings, they're familiar with them, they come easily to them, then they must say 18 every day. But if they're not quite there yet, an abbreviated 18 is fine. And then Rabbi Eliezer comes in with this really beautiful teaching that guides the way we as Jews approach prayer, which is one who makes their prayer fixed. Their prayer does not constitute true supplication. And here we have this tension between fixed prayer, the prayers that we have to say, which is referred to as keva. It is the fixed order. So a good example of this is saying the Shema and the Ve'ahavta in the evening, in the morning. It says when you lie down and when you rise up. So we have to say it twice a day. And then there's also kavanah, which means intention. And that is spontaneous prayer. Prayer that sort of comes from the depths of your soul, that's not reading from what was passed down by generations, but is expressing what's really important and what's burning inside of you in that particular moment. And so Rabbi Eliezer is encouraging us, while there is fixed prayer, there is this notion that every day we must say the 18, we must say the Amidah, we must say the Shemona Esrei, all of those things are interchangeable, that it can't just be rote. It can't just be reading the words out of the page, but that there also has to be that kavanah, that intention that constituted as sort of supplication, as this spiritual outpouring of our hopes, our dreams, our failings, our faults, our regrets, all of these things that come out when we open ourselves up to a prayerful experience. And so these are the two things that guide the formation of the 18 blessings. So before we get too deep into it, as is our custom with these sessions, we'll bring in some singing, and as a way of bringing in a little bit of intention. This session's going to be a little bit heavier on the text, a little bit heavier on the study side, but I wanted to bring some intention to it as well, bring some music as a way of lifting up our morning, lifting up our week, or whatever you need lifted up in this particular moment. Make sure I get my guitar all set here. And here we have Adonai Sfatai Tiftach Ufi Agid Yelatecha. Eternal God, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. It is a verse from the Psalms, from Psalm 51. And it is customarily recited before the 18, before the Shema and Its Blessings, before the Amidah. And it's a way of setting that intention and almost praying for the ability to pray, which I think is a beautiful sentiment, because prayer is hard. It's hard to focus our minds. It's hard to express these things. And sometimes we need a little bit of help. And wherever we might find that help, whether it's through song, whether it's through silence, I hope that we're able to find it as a way of facilitating a real prayerful experience. Ya na 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 Adonai, Ya na 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 Satai Titach, Ya na 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 Ufi Yagin Tehilatecha, Ya na 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 Ya na 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 Sfatai Tiftach, Ya na 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 Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha, Ya na 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 Adonai, Ya na 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 Sfatai Tiftach, Ya na 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 Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha. With our intention set, we move into the 18, the Shema and Its Blessings. Professor Larry Hoffman, teaches in his My People's Prayer Book, or explains everything about the Amidah is intriguing. We don't know for sure when Jews started saying it, or even why. Most puzzling of all is how it came to consist of 19 benedictions, blessings, since the Amidah is also named the Shema and Its Blessings, that is the 18, not 19, he notes, benedictions. It was the rabbi's favorite prayer, after all, known originally as Hatfilah, that is, the prayer. Literally thousands of learned Jews have spent their lives reading and rereading those few classical texts that purport to explain how it came about. So the Shema and Its Blessings, as we have it, is a little bit of a mystery. Where did all these blessings come from? Where did the themes come from? How did they develop? And we won't get too deep into that, but in a lot of ways we are joining in these thousands of learned Jews, or learning Jews. We're always learning. We're joining in this conversation to dive into the Amidah, to explore its themes, to see the particular system that the rubric works by. So on the following page, on page 3, we have this passage from Sifrei Devarim, which is a collection of midrash on the book of Deuteronomy. Now, we don't exactly know when a lot of these teachings come from. Some of the earliest are 3rd to 4th century. Some are later, 6th, 7th, 8th century. It's a bit of a compilation, but We read here, when the early sages instituted the Amidah for Israel to pray, they did not open with the needs of Israel until they had opened with the praise of the Eternal One, based on Nehemiah, the great, mighty, awesome God who sets free the captive. You are holy and awesome is your name, followed by heal us, and concluded with we thank you. And here we get a bare minimum, sort of a rough outline of what they thought the Amidah was. And it eventually, we know from the ancient world that there were certain fixed language for prayers, but because we didn't have the printing press, not everyone was reading from the same books, and not everyone learned the prayers the same way, that there were certain fixed elements of prayer of the Shemona Esrei, but there were also differences based on community. There were differences based off certain times in history. And so while there were certain fixed things, keva, there was also kavanot that came from the unique nature of each community. And it wasn't until much later, into medieval times, and certainly with the printing press, that it became very set in terms of the language, which is what we received sort of in the past few centuries. And here, Professor Hoffman lays out the 19 blessings. And so it's separated into 3 sections. So you start with 3 blessings of praise. The first is for God's covenant with our ancestors, Avotenu v'Imotenu. Then for God's power, which is referred to as the Gevurot, Ata Gibor Leolam Adonai. And then for God's holiness. So in the evening, that's Ata Kadosh v'Shimcha Kadosh, which we do see in that Sifrei passage, you are holy and awesome is your name. And in the morning service, it is the full Kedusha. Nekadesh et Shimcha Ba'olam, continuing. And then in the middle, 4 through 16, we get these prayers of petition, asking God for various things. Now, each prayer ends with a blessing, thanking God or acknowledging God as the source of knowledge, as the source of healing, as the source of deliverance, whatever it may be. And then it concludes with thanksgiving. So you start with praise, and this is really a way of not just coming in and asking for things. Anyone who has asked something of maybe your boss at work or someone who is someone you look up to or have reverence for, you generally don't come in and just start asking for things. You usually want to sort of assuage and massage the situation by offering a little bit of praise, a little bit of flattery, but also in a lot of ways, this is calling on the unique relationship that the divine had with our ancestors as a way of almost kind of reminding God of who we are, why we're here, and as a way of using their merit as a way of allowing and encouraging God to hear our prayers. That's sort of the idea behind it. And then, of course, you end with gratitude. You thank God for the ability to worship. You offer gratitude for all the goodness that we experience. And then, as with most things, we end with a prayer for peace. And you'll notice, if you're ever sitting in Shabbat services during the weekends, that these middle blessings, these middle 12 blessings, are not included. Generally, you have the first 3, and then you have 2 different ones, and then you have the last 3. So the first 3 and the last 3 are fixed, but the ones in the middle shift depending on the time of the week or even the time of the year. Certain holidays have specific insertions in that middle section. And the reason for that is because on Shabbat, we read in the book of Genesis that God rests. And so the idea is that we're not asking God for things. We're not petitioning God for things on Shabbat. We are simply acknowledging, offering gratitude, and sort of celebrating the unique privilege it is to have this day of rest, this holy, holy day. And so we continue with the Siddur and ideology, if we continue on page 4. And the prayer book as a text is a way of expressing our deepest hopes, our insights, our wishes for the world, and also our understanding of ourselves and our place within it. And so for the ancient rabbis, this was a way of distinguishing sort of their form of Judaism, their form of observing the commandments, of approaching the Torah and the Hebrew Bible, all of those things, versus other different groups who had different approaches, let's just say. And this was their way of expressing that. And the same is true today. In different prayer books, you will find different language. And particularly in the Reform movement, one of the innovations that we have is changing the language for certain blessings in a way that best accords with our values and our ideology as modern Jews living in the modern world. And there are those who fixate on sort of that fixed element, that keva of the prayer book, and don't want it to change. But we know from history that it wasn't until later that it was fixed, that actually it was very fluid in ancient times. And it wasn't until later, when people wanted a certain level of uniformity when it came to the prayer book, that it became fixed. And so the early reformers, and it's not just a reform thing, you'll find certain changes in conservative prayer books as well, adjusted the language of certain prayers in a way that make them better fit the way we think and the way we pray here and now. And so I wanted to bring a couple of examples of this. So here is blessing number 12 from Professor Hoffman's laying out of the blessings for the punishment of heretics. Pretty bold and aggressive name, but it is a way of recognizing sort of the other. And in the traditional text, I just pulled this from Sepharia. We read, "Let there be no hope for informers, and may all wickedness instantly perish. May all the enemies of your people be swiftly cut off, and may you quickly uproot, crush, rout, and subdue the insolent speedily in our days," and so on and so forth. And it refers to God as the crusher of enemies and the subduer of the insolent. Pretty aggressive language, I think we can be honest. And it's referring generally, I think, to non-Jews. And I don't know about you, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. And it made our Reform forebears uncomfortable as well. And particularly as Jews came to be part of the modern world, we gained rights as citizens in various different countries and began interacting with the wider culture. And so having this type of language in our prayer book just didn't feel quite right. And so what the reformers did, and in terms of the changing of the language, someone who was really, really influential in this, a name that people should know, is Chaim Stern, a great liturgist of our movement. And I'm not exactly sure when the Hebrew and sort of this language came to be, but this is the way it appears in Mishkan Tefillah. And we read, "And for wickedness let there be no hope, and may all the errant return to you, and may the realm of wickedness be shattered." And it refers to God, whose will it is that the wicked vanish from the earth. It's slightly less aggressive, and it focuses on the idea of wickedness, not wicked people. It's not praying for the destruction of certain people, it's praying for the destruction of certain approaches to life, certain beliefs, however you want to conceive of that. And while it's easy to look at the traditional text and say, how could they say this? But I think it's very common for an in-group to sort of view outsiders with a great deal of suspicion, and particularly with a lot of the oppression that Jews in the medieval and late ancient world experienced, that language like this would resonate with those folks. But the beautiful thing about Judaism and Jewish prayer is that it's constantly evolving, constantly changing. And this is our modern Reform movement's way of adjusting this, but maintaining the core themes of the prayer. And we'll go ahead and skip blessing number 15. And we'll continue with another song, Shema Kol Ami, which is blessing number 16 on Professor Hoffman's laying out of all the different blessings. Yes, blessing number 16. And this is, I named this section Sound and Silence. And this is another tension. So we have keva and kavanah. We have fixed prayer versus spontaneous and intentional prayer. Not that the fixed prayer can't be intentional, but this is sort of the dichotomy that we set up. But also the sound and silence. The idea of saying things out loud, whether in unison or on your own, versus saying things within yourself. And this is another dichotomy or tension that we have when it comes to prayer, when it comes to the Amidah. There are parts that we say out loud, some in unison, some not, some responsively. And then there's silent parts, whether you're going through the Shemona Esrei on your own, or simply allowing the silence to wash over you and allow you to connect to yourself in a deeper way. And so this interplay between sound and silence, between prayers that we can say, that we can verbalize with words, versus prayers that come from silence. And this is a beautiful melody from Debbie Friedman. And it's praying that the universe, that God, that someone hears our voices, hears the intention with which we are reaching out, and grants us sort of kindness and compassion that we all need at different points in our lives. Shema Goleinu Adonai Eloheinu Chus v'rachem aleinu. Shema Goleinu Adonai Eloheinu Chus v'rachem aleinu. V'kabel merachamim uveratzon et tfilateinu, ki el shomea tefilot v'tachanunim ata. Shema Goleinu Adonai Eloheinu Chus v'rachem aleinu. Yai la 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 la, yai la 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 la, yai la 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 la, ya la 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 ya la la la, ya la 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 ya la la la. So as we move to a conclusion of this session, and of course this is just a taste, and I would encourage everyone to explore these themes when you're looking through the prayer book, whether it be during services, whether it be at other times. You'll see in Mishkan Tefillah that we do have these themes listed along the side, and explore how you might express these themes. We have the way that our ancestors did. We have the way that modern Reform folks have. But if we think of these 19 blessings, the Shemona Esrei, as being the center of our supplication, what are the things that we're hoping for? What are the things we want to see in the world? And I want to conclude first with a passage, this beautiful passage from Mishkan Tefillah, and with a final song. And on page 101, we read, "Lend us the wit, O God, to speak the lean and simple word. Give us the strength to speak the found word, the meant word. Grant us the humility to speak the friendly word, the answering word. And oh, make us sensitive, God, sensitive to the sound of the words which others speak, sensitive to the sound of their words, and to the silences between." So I want to conclude with a passage that often concludes in Amidah, which is praying that the words that we speak, as well as the words within us that resonate through the silence, be acceptable and be received by others and by something greater than ourselves. Yehiyu leratzon im revi veyom libi lefanecha Adonai tzuri Vego Ali Adonai to me Vego Ali. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Thank you so much for joining me. I will be back in 2 weeks for our final session of Exploring the Siddur. I hope you have a wonderful and blessed day, a wonderful and blessed week, and a happy Thanksgiving. We're just a week away. Take care, everyone.